So they've been distilling whiskey here since 1757. And it's not actually a working distillery anymore. It's done in a much more modern way now. But this shows you how it used to be done. The water was loaded into these vats here and heated with steam. Everything that you see moving in here, all the gears, are being powered by that water out there, spinning that water wheel. It's pretty impressive. That's how they got things done. No electricity. Yeah, that was the grain conveyor.
Yeah, pulled the grain up.
So this is a mash tun. This is where the grain was loaded, and after the water was heated, it would be pumped into here, and these contraptions here would mix it for 3 to 4 hours to make the wort, and then the wort was drained out of here for the next step. So this is where your mash was turned into wort, and as you can see, it's no longer moving. But before, I would think that this was constantly in motion. It was all done by the mill. Everything was powered by the water wheel. Okay, so from the mash tuns, the wort is drained into the underbacks, which you have a upper and lower. So here's your upper, underback, and your lower. So that's where your wort ends up before it goes off to the stills. This is the drive shaft that drives everything in the mill. No electricity, remember, this was all done through water, spinning that water wheel outside that turns this drive shaft, that in turn turns everything else in the mill and operates all the machinery. So in the mid-1700s, that water wheel was everything as far as power, the ability to power this entire distillery. But in the 1880s, if the water wheel broke, some new technology came around, and it was called the steam engine. And this is a steam engine that was used primarily if the water wheel needed repair or broke to power the facility. So, nice to have a backup. Don't want to go without that whiskey for too long. Alright, watch out.
Man, I bet industrial accidents happen all the time.
Oh, hell yeah.
Pretty sure this place wasn't OSHA approved.
Oh no, I don't think OSHA was around. Oh, so these are the fermentation vats. So once you have your mash turned into wort, they need to go in, the wort needs to go into these vats where they add the yeast. And the yeast reacts with the sugars and creates alcohol and a lot of CO2 as a byproduct. So here are the vats. Let's take a look inside one. And you could make a lot of whiskey in there. Hello! I don't know if you can see it, but it looks like people throw money in there and then no one ever goes in to get it. Make a wish. Basically, after the fermentation process, you have a wash, which is essentially beer. Probably wouldn't be a very good beer, but that's essentially what it is after it comes out of these vats. I know, there's money in all of them. People are making a lot of wishes around here. Okay, so these are the copper stills. Actually, not the original copper stills. Those were scrapped. These are from a different distillery, but this is where your wash goes. After the fermentation process, you start the distillation process, which is basically heating your wash. Water has a lower boiling temperature than alcohol, so the alcohol boils off first and goes up this tube, and then it is cooled. Usually these spiral down. This is only half the still. They don't have a full still here that I can see anyway. There may be some in a different part, but it's cooled, and basically you end up with something that's close to 70% alcohol. There's 3 stills here. Traditionally, Irish whiskey is distilled 3 times. And once it's distilled 3 times, you have a clear alcohol, which is then going to be aged in barrels and matured over long periods of time. The longer the better. This little desk you see here belonged to the tax man. So there was a customs or excise person on the premises at all times to figure out how much tax was owed based on how much whiskey was produced. So we don't like that guy, or at least the owner of this distillery didn't. This is where the coopering was done, which is basically making these barrels. Irish whiskey never used new barrels. They would always use previously used barrels. So I'm guessing this was mostly for repair of older barrels that previously contained sherry. The majority of barrels that are used today to age Irish whiskey come from America and were previously used to age bourbon. And then they're usually finished, sometimes finished, in like a sherry or a rum cask for 6 months to 3 years, depending on what flavor you're after. They play around with it a bit. So here's the blue vat. After the whiskey's distilled, it's got to be put into barrels, and it was done a little like this. And that began the aging process. And it was put in that barrel and then stored away in a warehouse. This is where they make the whiskey today. It's much more efficient. I'm not supposed to have cameras in here, so that's your grain. That's your spent grain. That's going to be fed to pigs. This is where the mash is done to make the wort. The wort is then added to the fermentation vats, and you can see the carbon dioxide is quite active here as the alcohol is being produced after the yeast is added and reacting to the sugars. So this one looks to be a little bit further along.
It smells a lot like beer.
And next it goes off to the copper stills to be distilled into alcohol. After the fermentation process, it's distilled, and this little copper still right here is the oldest working pot still in the world today. We just talked to the brewmaster here, and he was able to let me try what they call the potent, and it's basically the twice distilled. It's distilled once here, and then it's called low wine, and then it's distilled again, and then it's called potent. And it's basically moonshine, and I just tried it. It's strong, but it's sweet, and it's pretty good.
Irish Whiskey Society.
Yeah, so
10/8/2011.
all of these are reserved. These are whiskeys aging in the barrel reserved for Mumford & Sons, the Script, Irish Whiskey Society, and the 1 millionth visitor to the, oh look, Erwin Hennefarth was the 1 millionth visitor here, and he's gonna get his own barrel.
I'm jealous.
Lucky dog. So this is it. This is the last step. After it comes out of the barrel, it's usually cut with distilled water to proof, and then goes into the bottle and onto the shelves. Okay, so we're gonna try the whiskey. Kilebegan. It's a blended Irish whiskey.
And I gazed with a feeling rare, and I said, says I, to a